July 13th, 2026. Iran's new supreme leader had been in power for less than 3 weeks, and I want you to hold on to that number, 3 weeks, for the next 20 minutes. Because every decision we are about to talk about was made by a man who had not yet finished consolidating power inside his own government. 3 weeks in, and his first major military order was not to strike Israel. It was not to target an American carrier group. It was not to close the Strait of Hormuz. His first move, the first sentence this new leadership chose to write, was to put 2 missiles into the hull of an Emirati oil tanker. And within hours, every analyst in Washington told you the same story. Iran is spiraling. Iran is desperate. Iran is punching blindly at anyone in reach. That story is not just wrong. That story is the exact opposite of the truth. Here is what the anchors told you that night. Iran, reeling from American airstrikes that hit 140 targets across the country, struck back against UAE-flagged tankers in what analysts are calling an act of desperation. And that framing made complete sense, didn't it? An injured regime, a new leader with no track record, a country under blockade. Of course they're lashing out. Of course this is panic. CNN ran it. Sky News ran it. Every major wire service ran the same paragraph with the same word: escalation. One prominent commentator, a former national security advisor, said on air, and I'm quoting him directly, "This is what the death rattle of a theocracy looks like." Now I understand why that read is satisfying. It fits the story perfectly. The mighty fall, the desperate swing, the beginning of the end. Great narrative logic. But here's the thing. Narratives that feel the most satisfying are almost always the ones worth interrogating the hardest. So today I want to do something almost nobody in mainstream media does with a story like this. I want to look at 3 competing theories for what actually happened on July 13th. Present the honest evidence for each one, and then let you decide which one holds. Theory 1, the desperation theory, what the mainstream is telling you. Theory 2, the deterrence theory, a more sophisticated read, but one that still misses something crucial. Theory 3, the audition theory. And this is the one that I believe the evidence actually points to. This is the one that reframes not just this strike, but the entire war. Let's go through all 3. Theory 1, the desperation theory. Iran took a beating. 140 targets hit. The blockade reinstated. A new leader with no time to plan. So the regime reached for the one thing it could still do, make noise in the strait, to show its own population and its own military that it was still fighting. A political act, not a strategic one. Theory 2, the deterrence theory. Iran wasn't panicking. It was sending a warning to Washington, to the Gulf states, to anyone watching, that the Strait of Hormuz can be disrupted at any moment. A demonstration of capability. The message, push us further, and we close the tap entirely. Most of the smarter analysts landed here. Theory 3, the audition theory. Iran wasn't signaling desperation. Iran wasn't even signaling deterrence to the West. Iran was auditioning in front of a very specific audience. And that audience was not in Washington. It was not in Tel Aviv. It was in Moscow. And it was in Beijing. The strike on those tankers was a sales pitch, the opening line of a negotiation for a permanent seat at a new table. Here's why only Theory 3 survives the evidence. Now, I want to be honest and fair here. The desperation theory is not stupid. I don't like straw-manning arguments, so let me give you its strongest version. Evidence point 1, Iran just absorbed its most damaging set of airstrikes in modern history. 140 targets in under 72 hours. Infrastructure, military installations, command nodes. That is genuinely devastating. Evidence point 2, a new supreme leader has an internal audience. The Revolutionary Guard generals who just handed him the keys need to see that he is willing to fight. Striking back publicly, visibly, is almost a domestic political requirement in the first weeks of a new regime. Evidence point 3, the timing itself suggests opportunism. The tankers were in the narrow part of the strait. The window was open. The new leadership may have simply taken a strike of opportunity rather than executing a calculated plan. Evidence point 4, Iran has done exactly this before. After the killing of Qasem Soleimani in 2020, Iran's retaliation was aggressive-looking but strategically limited, a show for the domestic audience more than a genuine military escalation. So far, so plausible. But here is the one question the desperation theory cannot answer. Why those specific tankers? Iran has fast attack boats, coastal missile batteries, mines, drone swarms. If the goal was noise, if the goal was domestic political theater, you hit something American. You hit something Israeli. You hit the thing your population actually wants to see you hit. You do not hit the tankers of the United Arab Emirates, a Gulf neighbor you have been carefully not antagonizing for months. The target tells you the mission, and this target makes no sense if the mission was desperation. So let's follow the evidence for Theory 3, and I want to walk you through 5 specific sources, because this is where the picture becomes undeniable. Source 1, the U.S. Energy Information Administration. The EIA publishes exactly where Strait of Hormuz oil flows, and here is the number almost no Western outlet ran alongside their coverage of this strike. Roughly 20% of all global oil transits that waterway every single day. But here's what they buried in paragraph 9. Of that 20%, the vast majority flows east, to China, to Japan, to South Korea, to India. The United States, for the first time since the 1970s, is now a net energy exporter. America barely needs that strait. Asia cannot survive without it. Source 2, the Russian Ministry of Transport, 2024 Annual Report. Russia has been quietly building what it calls the International North-South Transport Corridor, a network of rail, road, and port connections linking Russia through Azerbaijan, through Iran, all the way to the warm water ports of the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. This is Moscow's workaround for Western sanctions, their answer to the closure of European ports. And the critical piece, the irreplaceable piece, is Iran. Without Iran as the corridor's southern anchor, this entire alternative trade architecture collapses. Source 3, the People's Bank of China. In its 2025 Financial Stability Report, China disclosed that energy security, specifically diversification away from maritime routes controlled by the U.S. Navy, was its single highest priority economic risk. The document doesn't name the Strait of Hormuz explicitly. It doesn't need to. Every energy economist knows what waterway they mean. Source 4, the Gulf Cooperation Council's own internal communique, leaked to Reuters, May 2026. Gulf leaders were already privately asking a question that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. What happens to our security guarantees if American domestic politics shifts further away from overseas commitments? The Saudi and Emirati leaderships were, in their own words, stress testing alternative diplomatic frameworks. That is diplomatic language for, we are quietly exploring other options. Source 5. And this is the one I want you to sit with, because someone said this out loud, proudly, on the record. The commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, speaking 3 days before the tanker strike, said the following in a domestic interview. The Strait of Hormuz is not a weapon we point at our friends. It is a shield we raise for our partners. Not a weapon pointed at friends. A shield raised for partners. He said the quiet part loud. He was not talking to the Iranian public. He was not talking to Washington. He was talking directly to Beijing and Moscow. And he was telling them, we have already decided whose side we are on. Now let me show you the timing, because the timing is where the design of this becomes visible. Focus on a single 36-hour window. July 11th, morning. The Chinese state-owned shipping company COSCO quietly rerouted 3 of its tankers away from the Strait of Hormuz, citing regional security conditions. This was not publicized. I found it in a maritime traffic monitoring service. July 12th evening, the IRGC Navy commander gives the interview I just quoted, a shield raised for our partners. That interview runs domestically. It runs on Press TV internationally. No major Western outlet picks it up. July 13th, early morning, Iran strikes two UAE-flagged tankers, specifically vessels operated by a company with direct ownership links to a Dubai-based logistics firm that has a contract with the U.S. Fifth Fleet for supply runs. No Chinese tankers touched. No Indian tankers touched. No Russian cargo vessels touched. The COSCO ships that rerouted on July 11th, they were rerouted back into the strait within 6 hours of the strike, once the smoke cleared. Now, no major network connected those three events. No Western outlet put those three data points in the same paragraph. But when you line them up, the picture is unmistakable. The COSCO reroute was the signal that the strike was coming. The commander's interview was the explanation of the strike before it happened. And the strike itself was the proof of the promise. This was choreographed. I want to give you a framework for understanding what Iran just executed, because it is a doctrine that has been used before, not by Iran, not in the Middle East, but by every rising power that has ever tried to buy its way into a great power alliance without having enough conventional military muscle to demand a seat at the table. I call it the choke point covenant. Here's the simple version. Imagine you are a small but strategically positioned country. You cannot beat the dominant power in a fair fight. But you sit on a road that the dominant power's rivals cannot live without. You cannot offer your rival an army. You cannot offer them a navy. But you can offer them something more valuable, guaranteed passage. Think of it like a toll booth on the only road to the market. You don't have to build the road. You don't have to build the market. You just have to own the booth and then choose very publicly and very deliberately who you wave through and who you stop. Iran just waved Russia and China through. Iran just stopped a Gulf state aligned with America. That is not a military act. That is a signing ceremony. The choke point covenant works because it transforms geography into diplomacy. Iran cannot manufacture fighter jets at the scale China can. Iran cannot produce nuclear warheads at the volume that makes the American deterrent sweat. But Iran can stand in the narrowest waterway on earth and say, we decide who moves freely here. And that to Moscow and Beijing is worth more than any treaty. This is not the first time a smaller power has used geography to buy an alliance it couldn't earn on the battlefield. In 1956, Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain and France sent troops. Israel attacked from the east. By every military metric, Egypt lost that conflict. And yet, Nasser emerged from the Suez Crisis as the most powerful Arab leader of the 20th century. Why? Because the Soviet Union stepped in. Because controlling the canal, even briefly, even under fire, demonstrated that Egypt could threaten the economic lifeline of the Western world. The Soviet guarantee that followed was not given out of ideological solidarity. It was given out of strategic interest. Egypt had made itself too valuable to abandon. That crisis reshaped the global order for 30 years. Here's the number I want you to hold on to. In 1956, roughly 1.5% of global trade transited the Suez Canal per day. Today, roughly 20% of global energy transits the Strait of Hormuz per day. The leverage Iran is holding is 13 times larger than what Nasser held in a world that is far more energy dependent than 1956. Nasser got Soviet missiles, Soviet advisors, and Soviet veto protection at the UN within 18 months of the Suez Crisis. The question worth asking right now is, what does Iran's version of that deal look like? And how far along is it already? Now, a sharp viewer is already raising an objection in their head, and I want to give it full credit because it is a genuinely good one. The counter-argument goes like this. Russia and China are not sentimental. They don't form alliances out of admiration. If Iran is too damaged, if 140 American airstrikes have genuinely broken the country's military infrastructure, then Iran is not an asset to Beijing and Moscow. It is a liability, a country you might have to rescue, a country that drains resources rather than providing them. And that counter-argument has real evidence behind it. China has so far limited its support to diplomatic statements, not military hardware, not direct economic lifelines that would trigger American secondary sanctions on Chinese banks. Russia has made sympathetic noises, but has its own war to fight. Neither has made the kind of concrete commitment that the audition theory would predict they should be eager to make. It is entirely possible that Beijing and Moscow are watching Iran perform, nodding politely and privately calculating that a broken Iran is more trouble than it's worth. That is a legitimate read. I won't pretend otherwise. But here is what that counter-argument cannot explain. It cannot explain why COSCO prepositioned its tankers before the strike. That is not passive observation. That is coordination. It cannot explain why neither China nor Russia has joined the American call for Iran to stand down, not even with face-saving diplomatic language that cost them nothing. And it cannot explain why, in the 3 weeks since the strike, no secondary sanctions have been announced by Washington against Chinese or Russian entities doing business with Iran. Because if Beijing and Moscow had signaled they were genuinely distancing themselves, Washington would have no reason to hold back those sanctions. The fact that they're holding back tells you something about the private conversations happening that are not in the press releases. Let me pull it together. Iran's new supreme leader took power in the middle of the most intense American military pressure campaign Iran has faced in 40 years. He could not match American air power. He could not answer 140 strikes with 140 strikes of his own. What he could do was step onto the only stage that matters to the two powers America fears most, and perform. The IRGC commander signals in advance. The Strait is a shield for our partners, not a weapon against them. COSCO repositions its tankers, so no Chinese ships are touched. Iran strikes UAE vessels with direct ties to American military logistics. Oil prices spike, putting cash directly into the Russian war chest. The Strait stays open for Asian energy imports. Every piece of evidence, the target selection, the timing, the prepositioning, the commander's framing, the oil price effect, points in exactly one direction. What did Iran's new supreme leader tell Russia and China with one strike? He told them, "I am reliable, I am in control, I know how to use this geography to protect you while punishing your enemies. I am not asking you to save me, I am offering you something you cannot build, buy, or borrow, the Western anchor of your entire alternative world order. That is not a regime in its death throes. That is a regime making its opening bid. Here are 3 specific checkable things to watch in the next 30 days. I am putting these on the record right now. Prediction 1. Watch for movement in the international north-south transport corridor. Specifically, watch for any announcement from the Russian Ministry of Transport, from Iranian state rail authorities, or from Indian port authorities at Bandar Abbas of capacity expansion or accelerated timeline commitments. If the audition worked, the first reward arrives as infrastructure investment, not as weapons. Prediction 2. Watch the secondary sanctions announcement calendar. The U.S. Treasury has a pattern. When it wants to pressure China and Russia, it drops secondary sanctions within 30 to 45 days of a triggering event. If we are at day 45 post-strike and no secondary sanctions on major Chinese or Russian entities have landed, it means Washington calculated the cost of provoking Beijing was too high, which itself tells you where the relationship between Iran, China, and Russia currently stands. Prediction 3. Watch the Gulf. Specifically, watch for any Saudi or Emirati back-channel outreach to either Beijing or Tehran that becomes publicly known, even accidentally. A diplomatic delegation, a trade meeting with unusual attendees, an energy deal that gets quietly signed. The Gulf states are doing their own calculation right now, and if they start hedging publicly, it means they've already been hedging privately for weeks. You don't need classified intelligence to track any of those 3 things. They will appear in public sources, and when they do, you will know exactly what they mean. Here is your homework. Pull up 2 sources and put them side by side. The first one, the EIA's most recent World Oil Transit Choke Points report. It's on their website, it's free, and it shows you exactly where Strait of Hormuz oil flows. by country, by volume. Look at the Asia numbers. The second one, go find the IRGC Navy commander's interview from July 10th. Press TV carried it in English. Read the exact quote about the shield and the partners. Read who he was speaking to and read what he didn't say. If you do that, if you put those two documents side by side, I don't need to tell you what to think. The picture draws itself. And if you find something that contradicts what I've laid out today, I genuinely want you to come argue with me in the comments. Bring your evidence. That is how this should work. Here's the question I can't answer for you, and I don't think anyone can answer it yet. If Iran's audition is successful, if Russia and China decide this new leadership is the reliable partner worth backing, at what point does that arrangement become visible enough that Washington has to respond to it directly, not with sanctions, not with airstrikes, with something that changes the actual architecture of the conflict? And when that moment arrives, are we going to call it escalation? Or are we going to finally admit it was the next chapter of something that was already underway while we were watching the wrong screen? I'll see you in the next one.